Dig Me No Grave by Robert E. Howard. Part 1. The thunder of my old-fashioned door knocker, reverberating eerily through the house, roused me from a restless and nightmare-haunted sleep. I looked out the window. In the last light of the sinking moon, the white face of my friend John Conrad looked up at me. "May I come in, Kirowan?" His voice was shaky and strained. "Certainly." I sprang out of bed and pulled on a bathrobe as I heard him enter the front door and ascend the stairs. A moment later he stood before me, and in the light which I had turned on, I saw his hands tremble and noticed the unnatural pallor of his face. "Old John Grimlin died an hour ago," he said abruptly. "Indeed? I had not known that he was ill." "It was sudden. Virulent attack of a peculiar nature, a sort of seizure somewhat akin to epilepsy. He has been subject to such spells of late years, you know." I nodded. I knew something of the old hermit-like man who had lived in his great dark house on the hill. Indeed, I had once witnessed one of his strange seizures, and I had been appalled at the writhings, howlings, and yammerings of the wretch, who had groveled on the earth like a wounded snake, gibbering terrible curses, black blasphemies, till his voice broke in a wordless screaming which spattered his lips with foam. Seeing this, I understood why people in old times looked on such victims as men possessed by demons. "Some hereditary taint," Conrad was saying. "Old John doubtless fell heir to some ingrown weakness brought on by some loathsome disease, which was his heritage from perhaps a remote ancestor. Such things occasionally happen. Or else, well, you know old John himself pried about in the mysterious parts of the earth, and wandered all over the East in his younger days. It is quite possible that he was infected with some obscure malady in his wanderings. There are still many unclassified diseases in Africa and in the Orient." "But," said I, "you have not told me the reason for this sudden visit at this unearthly hour, for I notice that it is past midnight." My friend seemed rather confused. "Well, the fact is that John Grimlin died alone, except for myself. He refused to receive any medical aid of any sort, and in the last few moments, when it was evident that he was dying, and I was prepared to go for some sort of help in spite of him, he set up such a howling and screaming that I could not refuse his passionate pleas, which were that he should not be left to die alone." "I have seen men die," added Conrad, wiping the perspiration from his pale brow, "but the death of John Grimlin was the most fearful I have ever seen." "He suffered a great deal?" "He appeared to be in much physical agony, but this was mostly submerged by some monstrous mental or psychic suffering. The fear in his distended eyes and his screams transcended any conceivable earthly terror. I tell you, Kirowan, Grimlin's fright was greater and deeper than the ordinary fear of the beyond shown by a man of ordinarily evil life." I shifted restlessly. The dark implications of this statement sent a chill of nameless apprehension trickling down my spine. "I know the country people always claimed that in his youth he sold his soul to the devil, and that his sudden epileptic attacks were merely a visible sign of the fiend's power over him. But such talk is foolish, of course, and belongs in the Dark Ages. We all know that John Grimlin's life was a peculiar, evil, and vicious one, even toward his last days. With good reason, he was universally detested and feared, for I never heard of his doing a single good act. You were his only friend." "And that was a strange friendship," said Conrad. "I was attracted to him by his unusual powers, for despite his bestial nature, John Grimlin was a highly educated man, a deeply cultured man. He had dipped deep into occult studies, and I first met him in this manner, for as you know, I have always been strongly interested in these lines of research myself. But in this, as in all other things, Grimlin was evil and perverse, He had ignored the white side of the occult and delved into the darker, grimmer phases of it, into devil worship and voodoo and Shintoism. His knowledge of these foul arts and sciences was immense and unholy, and to hear him tell of his researches and experiments was to know such horror and repulsion as a venomous reptile might inspire. For there had been no depths to which he had not sunk, and some things he only hinted at, even to me. I tell you, Kirowan, it is easy to laugh at tales of the black world of the unknown, when one is in pleasant company under the bright sunlight, but had you sat at ungodly hours in the silent bizarre library of John Grimlin, and looked on the ancient musty volumes and listened to his grisly talk as I did, your tongue would have cloven to your palate with sheer horror as mine did, and the supernatural would have seemed very real and near to you, as it seemed to me. But in God's name, man, I cried, for the tension was growing unbearable, come to the point and tell me what you want of me. I want you to come with me to John Grimlin's house and help carry out his outlandish instructions in regard to his body. I had no liking for the adventure, but I dressed hurriedly, an occasional shudder of premonition shaking me. Once fully clad, I followed Conrad out of the house and up the silent road which led to the house of John Grimlin. The road wound uphill, and all the way, looking upward and forward, I could see that great grim house perched like a bird of evil on the crest of the hill, bulking black and stark against the stars. In the west pulsed a single dull red smear where the young moon had sunk from view behind the low black hills. The whole night seemed full of brooding evil, and the persistent swishing of a bat's wing somewhere overhead caused my taut nerves to jerk and thrum. To drown the quick pounding of my own heart, I said, do you share the belief so many hold, that John Grimlin was mad? We strode on several paces before Conrad answered, seemingly with strange reluctance. But for one incident, I would say no man was ever saner. But one night in his study, he seemed suddenly to break all bonds of reason. He had discoursed for hours on his favorite subject, black magic, when suddenly he cried, as his face lit with a weird, unholy glow, why should I sit here babbling such child's prattle to you? These voodoo rituals, these Shinto sacrifices, feathered snakes, goats without horns, black leopard cults, bah! Filth and dust that the wind blows away, dregs of the real unknown, the deep mysteries, mere echoes from the abyss. I could tell you things that would shatter your paltry brain. I could breathe into your ear names that would wither you like a burnt weed. What do you know of Yog-Sothoth, of Cathulos, and the sunken cities? None of these names is even included in your mythologies. Not even in your dreams have you glimpsed the black cyclopean walls of Koth, or shriveled before the noxious winds that blow from Yuggoth. But I will not blast you lifeless with my black wisdom. I cannot expect your infantile brain to bear what mine holds. Were you as old as I, had you seen, as I have seen, kingdoms crumble and generations pass away, had you gathered as ripe grain the dark secrets of the centuries? He was raving away, his wildly lit face scarcely human in appearance, and suddenly, noting my evident bewilderment, he burst into a horrible, cackling laugh. Gad, he cried in a voice and accent strange to me, methinks I frightened ye, and certes it is not to be marvelled at. Sith ye be but a naked savage in the arts of life after all. Ye think I be old, eh? Why, ye gaping lout, ye drop dead were I to divulge the generations of men I'd known. But at this point, such horror overcame me that I fled from him as from an adder, and his high-pitched diabolical laughter followed me out of the shadowy house. Some days later, I received a letter apologizing for his manner and ascribing it candidly, too candidly, to drugs. I did not believe it, but I renewed our relations after some hesitation. It sounds like utter madness, I murmured. Yes, admitted Conrad, hesitantly. But Kirowan, have you ever seen anyone who knew John Grimlin in his youth? I shook my head. I have been at pains to inquire about him discreetly. He has lived here, with the exception of mysterious absences, often for months at a time, for 20 years. The older villagers remember distinctly when he first came and took over that old house on the hill, and they all say that in the intervening years he seemed not have aged perceptibly. When he came here, he looked just as he does now, or did up to the moment of his death, of the appearance of a man about 50. I met old von Bunk in Vienna, who said he knew Gremlin when a very young man studying in Berlin 50 years ago, and he expressed astonishment that the old man was still living, for he said at that time Gremlin seemed to be about 50 years of age. I gave an incredulous exclamation, seeing the implication toward which the conversation was trending. Nonsense! The professor is past 80 himself, and liable to the errors of extreme age. He confused this man with another. Yet as I spoke, my flesh crawled unpleasantly, and the hairs on my neck prickled. Well, shrugged Conrad, here we are at the house. The huge pile reared up menacingly before us, and as we reached the front door, a vagrant wind moaned through the nearby trees, and I started foolishly as I again heard the ghostly beat of the bat's wings. Conrad turned a large key in the antique lock, and as we entered, a cold draft swept across us like the breath from the grave, moldy and cold. I shuddered. We groped our way through a black hallway and into a study, and here Conrad lighted a candle, for no gas lights or electric lights were to be found in the house. I looked about me, dreading what the light might disclose, but the room, heavily tapestried and bizarrely furnished, was empty save for us two. Where is it? I asked in a husky whisper from a throat gone dry. Upstairs, answered Conrad in a low voice, showing that the silence and mystery of the house had laid a spell on him also. Upstairs, in the library, where he died.